An FBI team dispatched by Christopher Wray, the director, made its way up to Capitol Hill, hoping that Jim Comer, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, would be satisfied with a look-see at the document that had been subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee from the FBI, detailing an allegation that Mr. 10%, the big guy, President Biden, took bribes from a foreign official. Jim Comer wasn't satisfied with the look-see, and here's what he said.
We believe there are multiple documents.
Mr. Chair, why do you need the document at hand? You just got a chance to view it, so why do you need it, and why move forward with contempt when the FBI says they're cooperating in good faith?
Well, let's just look at what I've read in a lot of the media accounts, and with statements that Ian Sams has made from the White House that there's no merit to this. This is crazy. This is a conspiracy theory. And you're just supposed to take my word or the FBI's word. I'm supposed to take the FBI's word that they're investigating this, or that you're going to write that the source is unverified, whatever.
Okay. Well, he announced that he is going to pursue a contempt proceeding against Christopher Wray for failure to comply with the subpoena. Bill McGurn, writing in the Wall Street Journal about this, and the allegation. We understand it's just an allegation. Well, that's why you want to investigate the allegation, to see if there's evidence to support it. Pretty straightforward. McGurn writes, given the seriousness of the charge, such an allegation would go up the chain to the FBI director himself, then to the Attorney General. So if this one didn't, why not? We don't know, but it's a question. Whatever happened, various FBI or justice officials were making decisions along the way. They could also be called to testify under oath before too long. And point of fact, as this is being dismissed as sort of, this is part of a tranche of documents that Rudy Giuliani turned over, and Rudy Giuliani can't be trusted, so there's no merit to this allegation, even though Comer makes the point that the person making this allegation is a longtime source for the FBI. A longtime trusted source from the FBI. Now, that's not dispositive of the issue either, because Stephen Halper was a longtime asset of the FBI, too, and he was one of the parties who cooked up the Russian collusion hoax by suggesting that George Papadopoulos was colluding with the Russians and helping to provide the cover for the FBI to do all the illicit things they did. So that's not dispositive, but it's something that requires more investigation. And by the way, if this is a nothing to see here, then why is the FBI saying that they're using this document as part of an ongoing investigation if it's without merit? More questions. McGurn goes on to say this is why they want not only the document, they want to know who did what and why, and to let the public know. If the FBI did its job, it would help itself by clearing up the confusion now, but that's not what the FBI does. The question now, continued McGurn, is whether the FBI's resistance is about protecting sources from exposure, as it claims, or about protecting itself from accountability, which we've seen a lot of over the last half a dozen years, haven't we? For more on all this, pleased to be joined by Thomas Baker, retired FBI special agent and legal attaché, author of The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. Oh, there's that phrase again. Thomas Baker, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you, Dan.
What's your assessment of this pursuit of that document and others by Comer and company and the FBI's response?
Well, bottom line, Dan, it should have never come to this. I worked for several years in the FBI's old Office of Congressional and Public Affairs, and the directors at that time instructed us, demanded of us, that we make every effort to cooperate with Congress. Now, there is a legitimate reason, obviously, and a long tradition in the Bureau of protecting informants. But when this request was first made, the subpoena first delivered over a month ago now, the response could have been preparation of a summary of the informant's information, or producing the document with identifying data blocked out. There are all kinds of accommodations that could have and should have been reached. a long time ago, but instead they waited till the deadline and they sent a 6-page, very disrespectful letter from an acting assistant director back to the committee chairman saying no 6 different ways and 6 different pages. And then we went this back and forth, and then yesterday they allowed them to look at it but not take notes, I believe. The atmosphere between the Congress and the FBI has been poisoned, and it's so unnecessary. There should have been a lot more cooperation right from the get-go.
In your view, and talking to former colleagues and maybe current employees at the FBI, has anything changed from Comey to Wray?
Well, that's an unfair comparison because Comey did so much damage to the FBI and its reputation and ultimately to the country and to a whole system of justice. And I would not accuse Wray of any of that. My beef with Wray is, and others, is he hasn't recognized the underlying cultural problem that was there when he got there, that was set up by Mueller and Comey. He constantly, every time something happens, he said, well, the bad people, the evildoers, they're gone. They're no longer with us. We're moving on. And it's my contention and that of others. It's not just a few bad apples. It's the changes in the culture that have come about that have led to all of these problems.
So what's going to happen next?
Next in general with the Bureau, or next in this congressional issue?
No, in this congressional issue.
Okay, Amy. I don't know, but there's something there, and there's more than nothing there. There may not be a prosecutable case, but there's definitely something there, because in the context of this committee asking for this document, which refers to a specific $5 million transfer, allegedly, to the former vice president's benefit, at the same time, the committee has brought to light from the banking regulators over 100 suspicious activity reports, which show a flow of multiple millions of dollars to numerous members of the Biden family. For doing what, we don't know. So when you put these two things together, the one is corroborating the other. And so there's something there. There's something that needs to be pursued. Now, perhaps the Bureau is pursuing it, or pursuing it against some of these individuals. And someday we'll find that out. But it's taken a long time. And then, of course, you have the background of the original Hunter Biden laptop, which had a lot of incriminating information in it, which dovetails with these recent money transfers and with this recent specific allegation of the $5 million.
I mean, just with Christopher Wray, I mean, do you think that there is any possibility that any of these investigations will be done on the up and up? And I say that because what was his reaction to the Durham report? To a Durham report that was a pretty pointed indictment of the culture at FBI. And when the time came to discuss recommended reforms, he basically just did Durham. It's not a specific reform. It's a return to the principles of old, which I assume him to mean, equal protection before the law and going where the facts lead, regardless of partisan political considerations, rather than being completely motivated by partisan political considerations. So, and Ray's response was, "Oh yeah, we fixed all that."
Yeah, Ray's response was, yes, he said that, and he said the people who are responsible for all these things are no longer with us. And that's been his response to every one of these embarrassing incidents that come to the surface. Well, they're no longer with us. What Durham did say in his conclusion to the report, he even used the term, the FBI needs to be continuously reminded of what happened in the Russian collusion thing and why. Continuously reminded. Those are Durham's words. And what happened was an investigation was undertaken without any, in Durham's report assessment, and in my belief too, predicate information. There was no reason for beginning that investigation whatsoever. And at the same time, Durham goes into this quite a bit. There was information coming forward about Hillary Clinton's collusion with others in and out of the government to create a false narrative about Trump. And that was never looked at or never weighed in the decision-making by the Bureau. So Wray is disappointing in that he's not recognizing there's an underlying cultural problem at the Bureau. Durham's report clearly points in that direction, and I must say, Durham's report, numerous people have said this to me, validates an awful lot of the things I said in my book, The Fall of the FBI. I didn't have the benefit of the Durham report when I wrote it, but I did have the benefit of being able, and everybody could online, read his indictments of earlier characters earlier in the probe, and that clearly painted the picture that this was the Russian collusion investigation was an investigation without merit.
Yeah, I mean, I find Wray really rather detestable because there are things going on that require explanation. As sort of Bill McGurn was saying, that he refuses to explain. He's hiding, and all this, ongoing investigation methods and sources, kind of a bull jive notwithstanding. It's just that. I mean, I look the juxtaposition of the stuff coming out about January 6th and filings made by the Department of Justice that clearly indicate that there were FBI confidential informants, FBI assets that were on the ground in the crowd on that day. And there's no accounting for that. There's no accounting for allegations of instigating lawlessness and so forth. That needs to be addressed. Why? What was the purpose? What was the assessment of the performance? The footage that comes out. Footage now just recently that a door on the west side of the Capitol was left open and unguarded for key moments during the rioting that allowed more than 300 people to enter the building unimpeded. So the performance of Capitol Police, maybe even the complicity of Capitol Police in some respect, exculpatory evidence that was excluded or that was not turned over by prosecutors in the QAnon shamans trial. That ultimately now, when it became public, thanks to Kevin McCarthy turning over all the tapes to Tucker Carlson, now instead of doing whatever half a dozen years, the QAnon shaman is at a halfway house. And it's not about him. It's just about the rule of law. And everywhere it seems to be clear it's being violated, or there are two standards. All these yahoos on the mall on January 6th saying the election was stolen and without any capacity to change the outcome, that's a threat to our democracy. And people can be kept in a dungeon for a year and a half. Meanwhile, Peter Strzok, the assistant director of counterintelligence, and, the email exchange that we all have where Lisa Page, his lover, says Trump's not going to be president. And Strzok says, no, we're going to stop it. So there's the assistant director of counterintelligence for the FBI saying he's going to try to alter or stop an occurrence that in the 2016 election. That's not a threat to our democracy. Assistant counterintel director at FBI saying that and acting in furtherance of it. But a couple of yahoos, a few yahoos, even a few hundred yahoos engaged in lawlessness is a threat to our democracy. It was a coup attempt and so on and so forth. And Christopher Wray presides over all this, just as Merrick Garland does, and says nothing, provides no clarity, provides no framework for understanding why it looks like there's disparate treatment, because there is disparate treatment. They just sit there, and it's indefensible.
Well, that's a good word for it, indefensible. And I'll tell you, that's why I wound up painfully, and it was my publisher's suggestion, actually. The subtitle of my book is How a Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy, because I want to get people's attention, and I want to get Ray's attention. It's not just a bunch of bad apples. There's something wrong with the culture. The culture's been changed to a mindset of an intelligence agency, and that's very dangerous in the domestic scene. It's dangerous to the civil liberties of Americans, and now you have in the FBI these intelligence analysts who current agents tell me are driving the agenda, and they just look in circles for anything, and they come up with crackpot ideas, like looking at people who prefer a certain American flag, the Betsy Ross flag, that they're a right-wing militia, they're a threat to democracy, and then the most crackpot idea of all, but it tells you how loose the mindset is within the Bureau, that a couple of intelligence analysts, not agents, analysts, come up with the idea to target Catholics who prefer to worship in Latin as potential terrorists, domestic terrorists. I mean, that is just so shocking, but that's what happens when you start operating outside the guidelines, outside the parameters, outside the guardrails of the Constitution. That's the work of a domestic intelligence agency, not a swear-to-tell-the-truth law enforcement agency.
Is the FBI salvageable right now, in your view?
It's difficult. They have to recognize the problem. Once you recognize the problem, there are a lot of steps that can be taken to change the culture. But you first have to acknowledge that there is a problem. And unfortunately, at least publicly up till now, Ray has not acknowledged that. He keeps talking about individual bad apples who are no longer with us. It's the culture that has to be changed. And there are ways to do that. And I'd like to be an optimist, and we have to be optimistic and think that we can change, and we can. Because I'll tell you, for people like me, and I've talked to dozens of others, it breaks our heart to see what's become of the FBI.
He is Thomas Baker, retired FBI special agent and legal attaché, author of the book he was just mentioning, The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. Thomas Baker, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan and Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.